Hi, this is Mr. James. In this video we'll be talking about how to name points, lines, rays, and segments, and a little bit about planes as well. So let's get started. Here we've got just a set of points. Now if I asked you to pick one of them out and tell me which one you picked, it might be kind of hard. Let's say if you picked this one, you might say, well, it's kind of in the middle and it's in the top, but I mean this one's also in the top, and this one's kind of in the middle as well, and so is this one. So it's kind of hard to actually figure out which point you're talking about. So to be a little more precise, every time we talk about points, we're going to refer to them with a capital letter. For example, your point would have been point B. What about lines? Well, if a line just goes through one point, well, it's pretty easy. This is the line that goes through point A, and this is the line that goes through point F. But that doesn't often happen. Oftentimes, our lines go through many points. So if I said point to the line that goes through point A, would you be talking about this line or this line? Because they both, in fact, go through point A. Well, we wouldn't know. So whenever you refer to a line, we're going to be referring to 2 points that it goes through. So for example, this line right here would be referred to as line AC because it goes through points A and point C. And this line right here would be referred to as line AE because it goes through A and E. So for lines, we're going to refer to them with 2 letters. Sometimes we'll have special lines that we refer to with just 1 letter, and that letter is often cursive, italic, or bold, and appears near the end of the line, near the arrow. So for example, this line right here would be referred to as line M. This line right here would be referred to as line P. So here we have our lines from before. Now what's the difference between this picture and this picture? Well, in the previous one we had lines. Now lines are one-dimensional figures that go on infinitely in both directions. They keep going. So this line, even though it stops here on the figure, the arrows mean it keeps going on forever, infinitely. Over here, we're not dealing with lines anymore, we're dealing with line segments, or just segments. Segments have a definitive 2 endpoints. Same as before, we'll refer to them with 2 letters, but instead of being line AC, this right here would be segment AC. And the segment refers to this part of the line with just those 2 endpoints. It doesn't go on infinitely, it's only from here all the way up to here, A to C. Now what's the difference between this now and these? Well, remember, lines go infinitely in both directions. Segments have 2 endpoints, a start and an end you can think of. This, on the other hand, is a ray. Rays have a definitive start point, or one endpoint, and then have an infinite length in the other direction. So for example, we could call this ray AC. We'll call this ray AC, and we won't call it CA, because whenever we talk about a ray, the first letter we use is always the kind of end point, or the start point, just like a segment has. And the next letter we use is the direction it's going in. So AC says that this ray starts at A and goes in the direction and through C. So we couldn't call the CA, only AC. What would we call this ray right here? Well, we couldn't call it EA because that would mean it's starting at E and going in the direction of A. Now that's not what's going on. It's starting at A and going in the direction of E. So we would call this ray AE. So just like segments and lines, we would use 2 letters, but very specific here. Starting at A, going towards E. So this is ray AE. Alright, let's take some formal notes on what we've just talked about. If you can, please pause the video now and fill in the blanks with 4 vocabulary terms. These first 4 blanks right there. Alright, let's fill them in together. The first one is a point. It has location and nothing else. No dimensions, no size, no height, no depth, no friends. This is an example of a point right here, point A. It uses a capital letter, and if we were going to talk about this in a sentence, we would call it point A. Okay. The next one is a line. A line is a straight, unbroken set of points that continues forever. It is infinite length, but no thickness. So we would say that it is one dimensional, whereas the point has 0 dimensions. Here's an example of a line, and we'll put at least 2 points out. I'll call that point B and point C. Now, if we're going to talk about this or write about this in a paragraph, we would do this. We would write B, C with a line on the top with 2 arrows to signify that we're talking about line BC. Now, since both ends go on infinitely forever, we could also write this as line CB. CB. Doesn't matter the order. Now, what would happen if I added another point somewhere in between B and C? Let's call it point D. Am I allowed to call this line DC? Can I use DC instead of BC? Pause the video here and predict whether I'm allowed to use line DC to refer to this line right here. Hopefully you've made your prediction. In fact, you can use DC, and the reason is that since this line goes on infinitely in both directions, if I talk about, line DC going through D and C, it's going infinitely in this direction and it's going infinitely in this direction. So DC includes B because it's still going infinitely in this direction. So it doesn't matter whether I call it DC or I could call it BD. Any of those are fine, as long as I've got 2 letters on that line with the line with 2 arrows on the top to signify that it is a line. One last thing you could do to name this would be to call it by a special name. Sometimes, like we saw before, we'll put a little cursive letter on the end, call this M, and we would call this line M, right? And that's for special lines. We don't do that very often, but sometimes. So here's a little bit of sparkle for that special line. Moving on. A line with 1 endpoint is a ray, and a line with 2 endpoints is a segment, or a line segment. Now, here's an example of a ray. I'll draw for us. Okay. Call this EF. And here's an example of a segment. Call this GH. Now, a ray, how are we going to name that ray? Here's how we're going to notate that ray. We're going to write EF, and on the top we're going to put not a line but a ray with the arrow on just the right-hand side. And this is because our ray is starting at E and going in the direction and through point F. Now, am I allowed to switch those 2 letters? Am I allowed to call this ray FE? Can I do that? Or better yet, could I switch the letters and switch the direction of the arrow? Is that allowed? Pause the video here and predict whether I'm allowed to use either of these 2 to refer to this ray. Hopefully you've predicted, and actually the answer is that you're not allowed to use either of them. We can't use ray FE because that would mean that we're starting at point F and going in the direction of E, and that's not what the figure has on it, so we can't use that. We can't use this either. You might think it's okay because it looks like in this picture that if the ray's starting E and going in the direction of F, which is what we have, but for common notation purposes, we're not going to write our rays like this at all. We're going to keep the arrow going to the right-hand side whenever we write a ray. So for now, we're just not going to write rays going towards the left. Next up, we've got the segment. Now you can probably already guess how we're going to notate this. You could write GH with a line over it. And you can actually reverse this. You can call this HG with a line over it. And you're allowed to reverse it because unlike a ray that has 1 endpoint and 1 point off to, or 1 side going off to infinity, the segment has 2 endpoints. So it doesn't matter whether we go from G to H or H to G, we're going to have the same segment. Now remember when we were talking about lines, we were allowed to add this point in the middle. Call this maybe point J. Do you think that we could call this segment GJ and be referring to the same thing? Can I do that? Pause the video here and predict whether you think you can use GJ. Hopefully you've predicted. And actually, we can't use GJ. The reason is because in a line that goes on forever, it doesn't matter which 2 points you pick because that line's going on infinitely. But with a segment, it's got a definite length. So for example, maybe GH is 5 centimeters long, and from G to J is only 2 centimeters long. Well, GJ is 2 centimeters, GH is 5 centimeters. Those aren't the same thing. So with a segment, you have to label the 2 endpoints. You can't just pick points in the middle like you can with a line. We've got 3 more vocabulary terms we're going to talk about here. The first one is a plane. Now a plane is a surface with length and width but no thickness. So for example, a piece of paper is kind of like a plane, right? It's got length and width, it's flat and thin. The floor might be an example of a plane. The wall, the ceiling, a desktop. Basically a 2-dimensional space. So here's how I draw an example of a plane. Okay. And whenever we go to notate a plane, we're going to use at least 3 points. I'm going to put 4 on here for now, but we'll have to have at least 3. We'll call this A, B, C, and D. Remember, points, just 1 point. Lines need 2 points, but planes are going to need at least 3. So I could call this plane A, B, C. Or I could call this plane D, C, B, as long as I've got 3 points in there. Similar to lines, we can also have special planes. So if I put a cursive P on here, could be cursive, italicized, or bolded, I could also call this plane P for very special plane. This doesn't happen very often, but sometimes we'll use this. The last 2 words mean on the same line and on the same plane. So if you've got things that are on the same line, for example, these dots right here, or these points, excuse me, we call these co-linear. Co, think co-captain, co-pilot, meaning same, they're doing the same thing. Linear, meaning on the same line. So if you stand in a line with a bunch of other people, you are co-linear. On the same plane, you can kind of guess, co, for the same, and planar, coplanar. So if you have a flat sheet with a bunch of points on it, they are all coplanar. For example, posters on a wall might be coplanar. People standing on the same floor, coplanar. Lastly, at the bottom we've got 2 sets of problems. The first one wants you to draw following figures, and the second one wants you to name the figures in every possible way, using the letters and the symbols that we learned above. Go ahead and pause the video now and try these. Make sure you pause the video. The answers will come up on the screen in 3, 2, 1. Here are the answers. Alright, let's take a look. First up, we've got segment AB. There's some examples that you could draw. Next, ray EF. Here's some examples. Make sure that no matter what you've drawn, your ray has an endpoint at E, because that was our first letter, and has an arrow through point F. That's important. C is difficult. Definitely difficult, and we'll deal with more of this kind of stuff in class. Line L intersects plane W at point M. So here's line L. Think of it's just a line intersecting or passing through plane W. So think of almost like a pencil breaking through a piece of paper here, and there's point M where it's breaking through. We're naming these in every possible way. This you can only call, right here, ray ST. Right? You can't reverse that because it's a ray. The next one is a line, though, so we can call it line QR, line RQ, or we don't have to use the symbols, we could just write line M. We also have a segment here. Remember, the letters are reversible. Remember, because it has 2 of the same kinds of endpoints, whereas a ray has 1 endpoint and goes on for infinity for the other one, so we can't reverse that, but we can for here. LM and ML. Pay attention to what goes on top of those. And here we've got plane P. If we use that kind of italicized bold letter for the special plane, or we could use 3 letters, any 3 letters in any order to notate it. So plane ABC or plane CBA, or there's any options involving plane and then 3 letters, 3 points from that plane. Hope you've enjoyed this video on naming points, lines, planes, rays, and segments. Thank you.